Okay, so let's begin with a little meditation, a little motivation. Try to sit comfortably with your spine erect. I'll take a sip of water first. Relax your body, relax your mind. Let go of your busyness. Turning pages and so forth. And just watch your respiration, first of all, with a fresh mind, as though you were doing it for the first time. Apply some discriminating awareness in that you recognize when you're breathing out, when you're breathing in. Successively bringing your attention further and further inside, away from the senses, away from outer objects, and then also away from inner distractions in your mind, from different thoughts, appearances, conversations that are going on. Practice even now the ability to let go of thoughts that become objects of your observation in your mind. Although they may be present for a moment, if you don't attend to them, they will disappear over time. Then follow one respiration down to your heart, away from the cerebral region, and just focus on the mind, watching the mind. Not so much the content, but the substratum, the nature of the mind is being like a clear light, like a clear sky, the clear light nature of the mind. Having tasted this, at some point, you can more easily let go of the objects that are appearing to your consciousness, recognizing that they are not part of the mind. They don't have to be attended to. They're transient, adventitious events like clouds through the otherwise clear sky. Every thought, every perception, indicating that the mind is spacious, unobstructing, otherwise the thoughts could not appear and dissipate. With a somewhat quiet mind, see if you can observe a sense of I, as is explained in the Vaibhashika system, as the subtle self that is to be refuted, that which we are to see as selfless. A sense of a substantially existent person, not identical with the aggregates, not completely different from the aggregates, having some kind of nature similar to them, as though it were the head salesman of a group of salesmen, the 5 aggregates being the salespersons, and the head salesman being the sense of the ego, the controller. Or as the Buddha said, the sense of this self as being like a carrier, and the aggregates being like the load being carried. Right now, the sense of I, self, as though controlling the meditation, deciding, experiencing, tasting. So this sense of I can be refuted, can be overcome by recognizing that the self that does exist is the being imputed onto the aggregates, the 4 or 5 aggregates. It does not substantially exist the way that it is appearing as of a nature similar to the aggregates. There is such a misconception in our mind, although the upper tenets would say it is not the most subtle or damaging of our misconceptions, ignorance. But this is a stepping stone. Think for the welfare of all living beings who are laboring under a misconception of a self, ego-grasping, self of phenomena, who are caught up in their own self-cherishing, ignoring the welfare of others, protecting themselves out of fear, wanting to be happy, but never really finding it. For their welfare, in order to help them escape from samsara, to find the everlasting bliss of enlightenment, I'm going to again listen to the teachings, contemplate the various philosophical schools of Buddhism, to understand well the stages that Buddha explained at various points, so that I myself can, in this very lifetime, develop the correct understanding of emptiness, acting as an aid to quickly developing the selfless wish, altruistic wish to work for the welfare of sentient beings. Follow the Bodhisattva practices, embellished with the great fortune of meeting the secret mantric teachings of Tantra. So I'm going to listen to the teachings, participate tonight for the welfare of all sentient beings to quickly attain enlightenment. And then relax. Bring your attention back to the present. So, I noticed a couple of you were frantically going over your notes beforehand, so you might have some questions. Okay, no one wants to sit in the center. I have to look from one side. You can sit in the center if you like. You have a question?
Yeah, I actually had a couple, but I'll just start with the one that's been really troubling me. The notion of uncompounded space. I understand that you have a background in science, and one of the things that I was wondering is in Buddhist cosmology, is there such a thing as compounded space? And I'm getting at the notion in science that space is actually curved by the mass of an object that is inside of it. And that interaction would seem to be not uncompounded in that sense. And so is it that physicists use a different definition of space than they use in Buddhist cosmology? Or is there a compounded space, or
Yeah.
how do we?
Yeah, we mentioned before that the space that we're talking about here is a particular kind of space. It's not the space that we ordinarily think of and then that we perceive with our senses. It's a space that is defined as the mere absence of obstructing contact. It's called uncompounded or non-compounded space. Akasha, I think, in Sanskrit. Like Akasha Garbha, one of the great bodhisattvas. So it's a very good analogy to emptiness, because space, this space that we're talking about, is a negative phenomena. So it can't be perceived in general directly with the eyes. You could kind of infer it. Like you could, for instance, I don't see, like for instance, there is the existence of a non-elephant in this room. The absence of elephant in the space in front, I presume. All of you will agree, right? That's a negative phenomena. I can infer that with my eyesight, but I don't actually perceive the non-elephant in front. It's something I can perceive. I just perceive some space, some what we call compounded space. This kind of space that we perceive with our senses, that maybe you would say is what is being perceived by measuring instruments when physicists talk about doing various kinds of measurements. And when you're talking about the curvature of space, like Einstein's was the famous theory, general theory of relativity that he, I don't know if he won the Nobel Prize for that. I don't think he won the Nobel Prize twice, and he won for the discovery of the photoelectric effect and once for maybe the special theory of relativity, I think. I'm not sure. Maybe it was for the general theory of relativity. The general theory of relativity is talking about how one of the factors is that how, as you said, space seems to have a curvature and near massive objects, and maybe in a sense that kind of explains what gravity is and so forth, the deformation of space. So maybe that kind of space also is not what we're talking about, non-compounded space. Non-compounded space is the mere absence of obstructing contact. So, for instance, in any particular place where this cup is, we would have to say the cup could move here because of the existence of space. We're talking, when I say space, uncompounded space. If there was obstruction, we wouldn't be able to move. So then, say the cup is here now. Now, does that cup occupy the space so that there's no longer space there? So because I can't move the pencil
Right.
there.
No, it would not.
It doesn't occupy the space.
Right.
This is my question.
Based on that definition, I would say it probably wouldn't.
It wouldn't what?
Well, it wouldn't occupy the space. If it were, well, I guess the word is occupy. It wouldn't displace the space because it can't have an impact on it.
Right. In fact, the very fact that this cup is here indicates that there has to be space there. Otherwise,
Right.
the solid object that itself has obstruction couldn't be here if there weren't space. So the same thing in our meditation, when we meditate on the clear light nature of the mind, the very fact that there are thoughts that seem so solid arising in the spaciousness of our mind that might otherwise think, oh, I can't see the spaciousness, there's thoughts, all these, eagle-like, or what do you call it, falcon-like thoughts, or shark-like thoughts going through my mind. The fact that they're there at that moment, if you perceive that, the fact that they're present indicates that the mind is spacious, has this nature of being unobstructive. It doesn't obstruct the thoughts, nor is it obstructed by their presence. So they can leave in an instant. So if you're skilled in that kind of meditation, in one instant you can let go of those thoughts. One moment you're sort of fixated on them, the next moment you can let go and just sense the spaciousness that has to be there, that is there, for them to be present. So like in a cloud, I think I told this story before, in England, in Manjushri Institute, once during a meditation course. In England, at the center that we had there in Cumbria, it was a very, very cloudy and rainy during most of the winter. In fact, there were just a couple of days of sun a year, it seemed. So during one of the meditation courses, one of the monks at the time, as a German monk, Helmut Dieter Kratzer, he's no longer a monk, but he's a teacher in Germany. Dieter was saying apparently something about the clear light nature of the mind is like a clear sky devoid of clouds. And supposedly one of the people in the crowd, one of these English people said, "Yeah, what's that?" Clear sky devoid of clouds? So for instance, even on a cloudy day, you can sense, you know that there's no way that the clouds could be there unless there was spaciousness, you know. So that uncompounded space is a permanent phenomena. It doesn't change moment by moment. It's not the space that we see between one another. This is called intermediate space that we can kind of perceive. And on the basis of perceiving that, you can infer sometimes the existence of unobstructed space, non-compounded space. But even then, you can't be sure, because it could be like between you and I, there could be this big, perfectly crystalline glass wall, right? If I would run up to shake your hand, I could smash into it like it happens in the movies sometime, right? Have you ever walked into a glass door somewhere, not noticing it, or a mirror or something like that? So you can't judge that directly in uncompounded space. You can't judge your senses perfectly like that. So anyone else have a question?
The definition of non-compounded space is mere absence of obstruction. And what's the definition for compounded space?
And there are different kinds of compounded space. It's not, I don't know if there's just one called compounded space. There's what we call intermediate space. I can't remember what any other kind of space is called, but it's the basis. It is that which can be observed between, say, with the eye consciousness, between here and some other place, as not obstructing the light which is going back and forth, perhaps, something like that. That itself changes over time. Like, say, for instance, sometimes when we say space, sometimes we use the word space for the sky. So during the daytime, the sky has an appearance of sky blue sometimes. And of course, sometimes there's clouds or something. But at night, it has a dark appearance. It changes. It's not, the appearance is not the same. So that intermediate space is something which is an object of perception by the eye consciousness, I believe. But here we don't talk so much here. There's not an object of discussion here about the intermediate space. The main thing is just to define well what's meant by uncompounded space, because it is an example of one of the three examples is given in the Abhidharma Kosha in the beginning of the text of what the Vaibhashikas accept as permanent phenomena. There are some other permanent phenomena they accept, but those are the main examples. Space and the two cessations, it says, are permanent. So analytical cessations and non-analytical cessations.
So intermediate space would be a simile for compounded space, maybe? Is that what you...
Not a simile. You mean a synonym? There are various kinds of uncompounded space, one of which is called intermediate space, intermediate appearing space, Barnangi Namka. I'm not sure what the Sanskrit is. In Tibetan we say barnang. Barwa means in between, nangwa means appearing, or perception, perceived, that which is perceived in between. That itself has different appearances at different times. So that is not the actual uncompounded space. But I think there is more other kinds of uncompounded space, things that we call space that are uncompounded. That's what we usually think of as space, this intermediate space. But that's not what's meant here. Space is an uncompounded phenomena. So when we talked about the two cessations, I wanted to clarify something about non-analytical cessations. Remember we said analytical cessations were the permanent elimination, ceasing of something by the application of its antidote so that it would never arise again in the future. And so what kind of things is that? Like banishing a knight from the kingdom? Is that like an analytical cessation? No, that's not. The analytical cessations here in Buddhism are talking about things that can be abandoned so that they'll never occur again within one's experience, within one's mental continuum. So that means the arisal of various klesha. Those are some of the things that are abandoned in one's mind. Okay, and the seeds of those, klesha means what we call afflictions or delusions, right? Like, say, for instance, attachment. Right now you might think, oh, I can kind of control my attachment sometimes. I'm really good, and then I live out at Land of Medicine Buddha for a while, and then live in the redwoods and eat good food, and don't think about things, and then, all my attachments seem to go away. But then when I go into San Francisco, or even Santa Cruz, I suppose, or over to Clayton's house or whatever, then suddenly, when confronted with the objects of attachment, the attachment rises again. So it wasn't really ceased. That mere disappearance of attachment is not what's meant by non-analytical cessation, the mere, non-presence of something. But analytical cessation is something that we can develop in our mind by applying the antidote, the root antidote to all of the afflictions, which is a wisdom that realizes selflessness. Actually, it's at first when I think other religions, other philosophical systems, they're dubious as to whether some kind of philosophical understanding, that is this kind of analysis, can actually change one's behavior from the root, as though that could really eliminate these things that seem to be part and parcel of our nature. But it's the Buddhist position that indeed all of these various occurrences, attachment and good things, faith and generosity and kindness and patience and so forth, bad things, hatred, pride, jealousy, and unfortunate things, depression, low self-esteem, and so forth. All of these arise within the mind due to the appearance in our mind of a self, seemingly a self of our own identity, and not only the appearance of that, but our grasping to it, our adhering to that. There's a difference. Like I was giving an example at lunch today. If Santa Claus, at Christmas, Uncle Charlie's coming down the stairs, or say Don's coming down the stairs, or Pat dressed as Santa Claus, and we see them, they did a really good job. They got, someone did a really good makeup job. Not only are the kids convinced they really look like they might be Santa Claus, but they appear that way to us, but we don't adhere to that. Do you know what I mean by adhere? We don't believe that. We don't assent. We don't go along with that appearance. We know that must be Pat or Don or someone. Right? So analytical cessations are cessations such that the delusions, due to the application of wisdom on the path of seeing, it only takes place at a certain point. Once we reach a certain point, once we become an Arya being, on the path of seeing, when we've realized emptiness directly, or let's say from the Vaibhashika point of view, we've realized the Four Noble Truths, especially selflessness of persons, directly. And at that point, certain of the klesha, the intellectually formed ones at first, are abandoned or ceased so that they'll never arise again in our continuum. That wisdom, not that we can fall back again. It's not like we had an insight into something and then when we went over to Clayton's house again, we saw his collection of pictures or something and suddenly our attachment arose again. Not like that. This is called analytical cessations. The non-analytical cessations are also permanent cessations, not just the mere absence of something for a short time, but forever, not due to the application of the true path. Because when we talk about analytical cessations, what actually ceases the delusions is the meditation. And that meditation is called, at that point, that's called the true path, right? You know when we talk about the Four Noble Truths? One of the truths is called the true path. Truth of the path or true path of the Aryas, noble true path. Arya true path. So what that constitutes is the actual meditative experience, meditative equipoise, realizing, let's say, the emptiness of phenomena from a Mahayana perspective. Direct realization of that, not through intellectual sort of supposition, or even not even through an intellectual realization, but actual direct perception of that. That kind of experience is what's called the true path. True paths are actually meditative moments in our continua, right? They're not some kind of places you go, you get a ticket for the true path, you know. I had a chance to meet this great Lama, and he showed me the true path. It's not something like that. It's an experience that arises in your own mind that leads you to true cessation. So true cessations are analytical cessations. Non-analytical cessations are things such as the absence, say for instance, in the Buddha's continuum of any kind of distortion, any kind of error, not through the application of the true path, but just because of having attained that state. Or another kind of example that's sometimes given is impermanence itself can be understood as a non-analytical cessation. Did I say analytical cessation before? Non-analytical cessation of permanence. The fact that something is impermanent precludes, that very thing precludes it forever from being permanent. Was there another example? Or, what's your name? Leo. That's right, Leo. Leo's mind possessing the state of being other than being my mind, George's mind. Our minds could never become, one like that. So that could be called a non-analytical cessation. So non-analytical cessation is a state that permanently interferes with the arisal of its specific object of negation, not through the application of the true path. So I think all the schools accept non-analytical cessations, but they are not and they are permanent. The state permanently interferes with the arisal of its specific object of negation.
So is an analytical cessation almost like an epiphany?
An analytical cessation, is it almost like an epiphany? I don't know. Epiphany might refer to many different kinds of things. Who was it? Saint who? On the way to Damascus, who was it? Saint Thomas. Saint Paul. Did he have an epiphany?
Yeah.
Saint Paul, who's our Christian scholar here.
No, he got knocked off his horse and became blind by seeing the sight of a cross in the sky.
Okay. Did he have an epiphany? Do you folks know back there? Did Saint Paul have an epiphany on the way to Damascus?
Yeah. I'd say yes.
Yeah, that's supposedly, I think it says in Christianity. So some kind of experience that arises suddenly and changes a person completely, right? Sort of an insight. Maybe like in Zen Buddhism, people talk about satori. I remember asking or hearing, I'm not sure if I asked or someone else asked, one of the great Tibetan Rinpoches, Ngor Tartse Tulku, when he was teaching us Tibetan many years ago. He took the aspect of being a layperson. His brother is the Kunga Rinpoche over in Berkeley. And one of the brothers was, one of the brothers, Ngor Tartse was famous Sakya Lama. Kunga Rinpoche is Nyingma, right?
He's been
Sake.
recognized as a Kagyud.
Yeah, Kargyud Tulku. Another one was called Senshab Rinpoche, like our Kurti Senshab, the same word, who was a Gelugpa Tulku, 3 brothers. And there was another brother, I think they had brothers of all the traditions. Anyway, so Ngor Tartse Tulku was asked about, what is Satori? Do you know the word Satori?
Yeah.
Have you heard? See it? Yeah, like in Zen. It's kind of like, almost you would say it's if you just read about it, it almost sounds like some kind of epiphany, some kind of insight that changes a person. And he thought it was just some kind of, some kind of meditative experience that arises, but is not really a cessation, not a true cessation, because it's not necessarily through the application of some, the realization of emptiness that really is going to remove something from the root. Some kind of insight due to perhaps accumulating not only merit, but the different kinds of meditational experiences in the past, different kinds of experiences, and some kind of solidity of one's faith or whatever. So I wouldn't say that, I think epiphany might be too light a word to say for analytical cessation. Analytical cessation is something that really ceases. So let me just go over a couple of points here. I mentioned about non-analytical cessations. We finished briefly the Vaibhashika system, one of the 4 schools of Buddhist tenets, the first one that's usually studied. And I just mentioned about space, and the 2 cessations are said to be permanent. Remember, we talked about one of the important things here is their definition of conventional truths and ultimate truths. So, Venerable, what do you remember what they, put your eyes up. Yeah. What is it for the Vaibhashikas? What is a conventional truth? What is an ultimate truth? Even if you don't give the exact definition, what is an ultimate truth for Vaibhashika? Something which is ultimately true for Vaibhashika is something which, when analyzed with the mind, or you try to break it, either mentally or physically, what happens? If it's an ultimate truth,
if it's an ultimate truth, then it doesn't change.
The apprehension of it won't be damaged by analyzing it, or by, say, beating it with a hammer or something like that. Conventional truths are things such as the things we experience here. These are called conventional truths because if you were to analyze them into parts, say just think about the atoms of this or the molecules, you'd no longer be perceiving the watch. Or if you broke it with a hammer, you'd no longer have the apprehension of watch. So for the Vaibhashikas, they have this particular view that an ultimate truth would be there's particular things that are accepted as ultimate truths. Do you remember, Mintrel? What examples?
That non-compounded space.
Partless atoms. What else? Partless moments of consciousness. Pardon? Non-compounded space. Things like that which when perceived, even if you try to analyze them, you don't lose the apprehension of them. Say, for instance, if you take this robe, and if you were to try to separate it with either physically, take the threads apart, at a certain point when you're just looking at the threads, you no longer have the apprehension of the robe, right? Whereas ultimate truths are different than that. So for them, there are very few things that are ultimate truths, and they have that particular kind of quality that they are ultimate in the sense that they're not violated, they're not seized or damaged by that kind of analysis. There is something there that follows on into the highest tenets, some kind of sense, but that's not what the upper schools, especially Prasangika, the Madhyamakas, and so forth, mean by ultimate truth. All the different schools have a different understanding of what ultimate truth means and what conventional truth means. Sometimes seemingly completely at odds with one another. So you can't just assume that the term, even though the terms sound the same, that they mean the same in their different schools, right? So we talked a little bit about ultimate truths and conventional truths. We mentioned about as all of the schools except the consciousness arises due to three conditions: a faculty, let's say the sense faculties, other than the mental faculty, being subtle matter, and a previous moment of consciousness and an object. The three of them have to come together in order to give rise to a consciousness, right? And so this gives rise to a particular Vaibhashika tenet, particular view, that even the eye faculty, let's say, or the ear faculty, nose faculty, tongue faculty, body faculty, can be a valid cognition, can be pramana. Do you remember what that meant, valid cognition, valid cognizer? Usually, in the upper tenets, the only thing that can be a valid cognition is consciousness itself. Only consciousness can actually perceive. You could try to refute the Vaibhashikas if they were to say the eye faculty, the eye organ, the rods and cones in the back of the eye and the retina, if they were actually validly perceiving things, and then in the corpse, even when the consciousness had left, should have valid perception. So their argument about this has to do with how we perceive things. They say that since consciousness itself is formless, it should not be obstructed by any kind of opaque screen or obstacle between you and other objects. The reason that we're obstructed in perceiving objects with our senses, let's say not only the eyes, the other senses, is because of the fact that the faculty itself, which is the receptacle for the consciousness, eye consciousness can't exist and perceive things other than by abiding within the eye faculty, right? Can't just sort of go into the ear and see things out your ear or out any other orifice. It has to be in its own uncommon, empowering condition, the eye faculty. And because of that, because of its necessity to be in that, they say that therefore it is obstructed from perceiving things which are material, through material things outside. And that's their reason for saying that the one of the reasons involved in saying that the sense faculties themselves are valid perceivers, direct perceivers. Okay, we mentioned that a little bit. We talked about persons. The actual person, which is or self, or Atma. You know the Atma? You heard that word, Atma? Or where's Median? It didn't come tonight. The Atman, maybe you have to say nominative case. The Atman or Atma is actually that which goes from past, has come from the past, is existing in the present, will go to the future, and during that time experiences the ripening effects of karma and so forth, happiness, suffering, different kinds of experiences. That is the mere collection of the five aggregates. That kind of person is not permanent, partless, and independent as was set forth in certain Vedic teachings of the Atman. So I had a big discussion, sort of debate with Midian today. He was saying that the self must. How does this prove the self is not permanent? Anyway, we have to check. This first kind of selflessness that is proposed here is what even the Vaibhashikas here are saying is a gross selflessness of persons. The fact that the person is empty of being permanent, partless, and independent. Because the person is not permanent, is empty of being permanent because it changes moment by moment. It arises, the person arises, born, and passes away, and has a certain duration, changes. So that person is the actual self. The sense of an Atma somewhere else, a permanent self, is an illusion. At first you might say, well, no, I believe there is some kind of sense of self. The Buddha said that sense of self that seems to be permanent, that even in Christianity is called a soul and so forth, from a Buddhist perspective, is a misperception, like perceiving water in the mirage. There's something appearing, but it's actually empty of what we attribute to it, right? So the person is also empty of being partless, because the person that does exist, in the Buddhist perspective, is the person merely imputed on the 5 aggregates. So it has 5 parts at least. You can even divide up the aggregates into parts. So the person is not partless, not a single unitary whole as it might be perceived, or at least intellectually in certain tenets conceived of. And it is not independent, because it depends. A person depends on causes and conditions, depends on its own karma. The person's state depends on his past actions and present conditions, and is a creator of new karma. So it is not something which is independent. It interacts with the universe. That's the only self that exists. There is not a self as is proposed being a permanent, partless, and independent self. That, from a Buddhist perspective, the Vaibhashika perspective, is called the gross selflessness of persons. That, refuting that, understanding the emptiness of that, is called the realization of the gross selflessness of persons. And the subtle selflessness of persons, and in order to understand this, I think you'll need some blood sugar. So we'll take a break after this. How could it be the clock says 10 minutes to? How could it be there's only 1 minute left? You were taking other pictures on that tape, were you? Oh, you wound it. Okay. I should have a couple more minutes left. The subtle selflessness of persons is something that is innate in our minds. It's not something that comes about only because of philosophical tenets. If you perceive in your own consciousness, as we tried to do in our meditation, the sense of an I, the experiencer, the controller of the aggregates, or let's say, as Buddha said, the self is the carrier, the aggregates are the load. Sometimes in leading people that were trained in the Vedic traditions from previous lives, in order to at least not blow their minds too much. The Buddha did say that. In general, you wouldn't say the self is the carrier, the aggregates are the load. That implies that there is a findable kind of self. Because the load here, the aggregates, are the basis of imputing the person. There is no person that is the sort of controller of that. But it seems that way in our mind, like, as I like to say, the taster, There seems to be an I when you get that. Actually, the Hershey Kisses are not so good in America, I found. Do you like them? Mindro, you offer them all the time. You should get something better to offer if you don't like them. You just shook your head. You don't like them. Okay, they're good. But I think in Italy they have one, I can't remember, Perugia makes one called baci, which means kiss, right? You know those ones? Oh, they're wrapped in, they're much bigger, and the silver, you know? Anyone? Do you remember those are. So what is the sense of self that's experiencing that baci? Or let's say real kiss, you know, the sense of the self that wants to experience. It's not just as though there's that the lip, you know, that one is thinking, okay, my lips are now touching so-and-so's lips. My nose is now nuzzling so-and-so's nose. It's not like that. There is a sense of I, right, am experiencing something. That sense of I is what is, that seems to be a real substance, seems to, not to be one of the aggregates, but not completely different than the aggregates. Not completely the aggregates, not different than the aggregates, but seems to be substantial, that it really is existing there as some kind of findable substance. That is the sense of I that is called the subtle I that is to be refuted. So when we talk about the subtle selflessness of persons, it is refuting that particular sense of I as okay, so we talked a little bit about that. Zero time, but I can't believe there's zero time. We started after 7,
I
right?
must have messed up when I found
Okay, that's okay. Okay, so some of you may come across the word tirthakas. Do you know what tirthaka means? It's a Sanskrit word. Do you know, Vimal? Maybe in the Hindu tradition, also the Vedic tradition, they use the word, but they refer to others, those who propose a forward to false liberation. So basically you could say heretics or something like that, sometimes translate. Pardon? Okay, so the tirthakas, those who don't see the way completely, say that the person is a permanent functioning thing. Some of the Samkhya's and others is a permanent functioning thing. Vaibhashikas do accept that there are permanent functioning things, right? Everything that exists is a functioning thing for the Vaibhashikas, but what? But the person is not permanent. The person is impermanent. The person is devoid of being permanent, partless, and independent. And the Vaibhashikas, we'll just stop here, we'll just say one more thing. The Vaibhashikas do not accept selflessness of phenomena. They have a way of talking about saying that phenomena are selfless only in that they are not objects of use or utilization of a self-supporting, substantially existent person. So in that sense, there's no self of phenomena because they can't be used by a self-supporting, substantially existent person because such a person doesn't exist. But they say that if something exists, if any phenomena, the aggregates, even the person, anything that exists has to be truly existent, has to be able to be, it does exist in that way as true. So they don't accept that there is an emptiness of phenomena. So let's take a break. All right, so let's continue a little bit, some other points about the Vaibhashikas. Were there any other questions about the Vaibhashikas? 4 Buddhist philosophical schools that we're presenting here. There could be myriad others if you divided them up, but this is classically what is understood. The Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika are the Hinayana schools that are well known. Up to now we're talking about the Vaibhashika. We'll just introduce the Sautrantika later on today. And we'll continue the next couple of weeks. In fact, this Saturday we'll continue on Sautrantika. There'll be Sautrantika Day. And anyone have any questions then? Yeah, Leo, you have another one.
Very simple. To put a face to the Vaibhashikas,
Mm-hmm.
where do I find them? Where are they? Who are
In fact, of the 2 schools, the Sautrantikas you don't find so much as a living tradition today. You do find the Vaibhashikas in the Theravada, because the Theravada is one of the 18 Vaibhashika schools. Here in our text we divide it up into 3, right? What were they? The Magadha, Kashmiris, and the Aparantakas. But that's just a way of dividing them up geographically, I think. There were 18, classically, 18 sub-schools of the Vaibhashikas. in India that arose quite soon after the time of the Buddha and became more delineated over the next couple of hundred years. One of them was called the Staiviravada. Staivira is a Sanskrit word that means elder. In Pali, they say Tera rather than Staivira. STH, they don't have, and the conjunct consonants are almost non-existent. Distinct conjunct consonants. You can have double consonants in Pali, but you don't have like KR or RM. You don't say karma, you say kama. Remember we talked about that before? Dhamma. You don't say dharma. Dharma. It doesn't come in Pali. You have Dhamma. So I've mentioned this many times. This is my old sick joke. Pali is a little bit like John Kennedy speaking Sanskrit, right?
I thought it'd be more in New York. Damn.
Yeah. Pak the ka and the ha vidyad. You know, practice the Dhamma, watch your karma. So Staiviravada in Pali is Theravada. So that's one of the 18 schools. So that's where you'd find Theravada today. I don't know that you find remnants of the Sautrantika, but not so much, as I understand it, as a practicing lineage. Most of the other schools around the world, other than the Theravada, which you find in Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Vietnam, and some other countries, Malaysia, other countries, most of the other Buddhist schools are Mahayana. Chinese Mahayana, Zen, Japanese Mahayana, the Tibetan Mahayana schools, some Mahayana schools in Nepal, the Newari and others. So the mainly what we have today is Theravada, like the head of the Vaibhashikas. Okay, so I wanted to mention something that comes in this context in some of the other presentations. And that is kind of some other facets. When we talk about the 12 deeds of the Buddha, there are different understandings of that according to the different tenets. So remember like if you go up to the temple, the memorial temple at the top of the hill, there are beautiful murals around the top of the 12 deeds. So from the Vaibhashika point of view, the first 9 deeds were performed by the Bodhisattva. It's only the last 3, the attainment of enlightenment, not overcoming the Mars, but the attainment of enlightenment, turning the wheel of Dharma and passing away into parinirvana, that were performed by the Buddha. Whereas the Mahayana would say all of them, all 12 were performed by the Buddha. The Buddha had achieved enlightenment before even descending from Tushita heaven and so forth. And that the body that takes birth in the mother's womb, the Vaibhashika would not say is the emanation body. I may have misspoken about this the other day. I hope I didn't. We use this word nirmanakaya. Also in the Theravada, they talk about the emanation body of the Buddha. So that is only achieved upon attaining enlightenment. Nirmanakaya is contaminated or uncontaminated? Dana?
According to who?
According to Vaibhashika. Well, we're talking Vaibhashika.
It would be contaminated.
We have to be, because the Buddha's body for Vaibhashika is a contaminated phenomena, whereas the Mahayana would never accept the Nirmanakaya is contaminated. And they'd say also who descended from the actual entry into the mother's womb was the supreme emanation body. Okay.
The Mahayana would never say that
The Buddha's body is
Nirmanakaya.
contaminated.
So if you have your guru who's the Buddha, but he shows himself in the aspect of being a human. But
That may not be Nirmanakaya, right? Nirmanakaya, the emanating, like the Tibetan word tulku, what we call like reincarnate Lama, actually is a translation of the Sanskrit word Nirmanakaya, right? It's literally what it means. Nirmanakaya is a translation of Nirmanakaya. But it doesn't mean there's different meanings of that. It doesn't mean that everyone who's called a tulku, recognizes a tulku, is actually recognized as Buddha, because many of them are, have maybe practicing the tantric path or whatever bodhisattva path. So it's meant differently in the Tibetan cultural tradition, tulku or nirmanakaya. But when we talk about, even if one's, say, the Dalai Lama or someone who is, you're trying to practice guru devotion and see them as an emanation of Buddha, a manifestation of Buddha, that doesn't mean that they are emanating nirmanakaya. Nirmanakaya is something that is only perceived by beings of very pure karma. And like, for instance, it's said that all statues can be, when one reaches a certain level in the Mahayana path preparation, I think, I'm not sure, I think the Mahayana path preparation, you can see all statues as, oh no, it can't be a path preparation, it must be a path of seeing. You can perceive all statues as Sambhogakaya, the enjoyment body. I say that because the Sambhogakaya is only perceivable by whom? According to, not talking about Vaibhashikas, we're talking about, I'm not talking about Vaibhashika, talking about Mahayana.
Bodhisattva.
Arya Bodhisattvas. So it would have to be someone who's perceived emptiness, because it's very, very subtle. So at a certain point, I remember Lama Sopa Rinpoche once at a picnic at Manjushri Institute during the interim, he's holding, someone had given him a statue of Guru Rinpoche to look at. Oh, look at this nice statue of Rinpoche. Looking for, almost looked like he was listening, like receiving teachings, seeing advice, from Guru Rinpoche. Okay, so a little bit about the 12 deeds. It's said, when we talk about the 84,000, how do we usually translate it? Aggregates of Dharma, skandhas. Actually, they're called Dharma skandhas. Did we talk about that before? In the Mahayana, we say that the Buddha taught 84,000 heaps, aggregates. Same word, skandhas, but not in the same sense of the 5 skandhas. The word skandha comes in other contexts, not just in the 5 skandhas. Also, we talk about the 84,000, but in the Vaibhashika system, they don't talk about 84,000, they talk about 80,000, 80,000 skandhas of Dharma to be the antidotes to the 80,000 delusions. So in the Mahayana, we say 84,000. You might think the Mahayana then is inferior because it has more delusions. I'm not sure. So there's no, as far as I know, there's no explicit explanation why there are 84,000. One of my teachers, Geshe Jampa Gyatso, explained his sort of guess was something coming from Tantra about the number of breaths that one experiences in a day, 21,000 breaths times each of the, when we talk about the 3 root poisons, and then all 3 together. Sometimes that's how we get 84,000. So 21,000 delusions associated with attachment, 21,000 associated with ignorance, 21,000 associated with hatred, 21,000 associated with a combination of the 3. So that makes 84,000. So he said maybe the 21,000, because in some tantric teachings I think it says that's how many breaths. Is that how many do we take in a day or a year? 21,000. Do we have 21,000 breaths in a day?
Yeah, that's conceivable.
Okay. Anyway, you can check. You can count. Another thing the Vaibhashikas say is, we talked about the 3 pitakas, or not, the 3 baskets of the Buddha's teachings, in other contexts anyway. The Vinaya Pitaka, the basket of the Buddha's teachings on discipline, the Abhidharma Pitaka, on higher wisdom, and the Sutra Pitaka. And the Buddha, on various occasions, said, all of my teachings can be included in these 3 baskets, pitakas. Maybe because, in a sense, if you wrote down scriptures, they could be kept in these baskets, these, a different word than skandhas. So the Abhidharma Pitaka, as was enshrined in the scriptures, is comprised of 7 texts 7 treatises of Abhidharma. All of them have various authors, arhats and so forth. They're not like other sutras that say, thus did I hear at one time, blah, blah, blah. And the Vaibhashikas say that they were spoken by the Buddha. They accept that they are the Buddha's word, maybe inspired or otherwise. The Sautrantikas, as you will see, that's maybe one of the etymologies of the Sautrantikas, they say, There's not only were they not, well, one of the reasons they were not spoken by the Buddha is there's a lot of mistakes in there. The Buddha didn't make any mistakes. Like the Sautrantikas point out, particularly the assertion in these 7 Abhidharma, some of the 7 Abhidharma treatises, that there are such things as permanent functioning things. Remember, the Vaibhashikas say that there could be permanent functioning things. That the Sautrantikas slap their heads and say that's absurd. If something is permanent, it can't engage in any kind of function, causing actions, engaging in results, and experiencing in results, and so forth. So they say there are errors there, and they were not taught by the Buddha. They were taught by lesser beings, and that the Abhidharma Pitaka can be found within the sutras themselves. Various passages within the sutras you could point out and say, this is part of the Abhidharma Pitaka. It doesn't mean that a whole text itself has to be Abhidharma. Those instances or citations in sutras that refer to higher wisdom, the Sautrantikas, I think, would say were instances of the Abhidharma Pitaka. They didn't accept these 7 texts that the Vaibhashikas did as the Abhidharma, actual Abhidharma, as the Buddha's word. Then there's a little bit just to say about, I think all of the schools have a general common understanding of the evolution of the universe. We say that there are numberless universes existing. This one that we're experiencing now is not the only one. If you read the New York Times today, what's your name in the back there, gentleman in the couch?
Dwight.
Dwight, do you read the New York Times?
Yes.
I read it online. I don't have a prescription. So there was something today about physicists arguing about the number of universes, the possibility of other universes, and so forth. It's a very popular kind of discussion right now. Buddhism says that there are many universes, not only this one that we're experiencing now that seems to be expanding now. We call it, even in Western science, we talk the world, the universe is expanding, right? Something way beyond this. There are other universes existing, numberless, inhabited by sentient beings, and all of these universes go through cycles. They go through 4 eons, or kalpas. The Sanskrit word is kalpa. You've heard of that, right? Sounds like some kind of dog food, doesn't it? Kalpa. Kalpa. 4 kalpas. So, or eons. If you're of the British persuasion, you'll spell it with A first, right? A-E-O-N. In American, we spell E-O-N, I think. So there is an eon of formation in every universe when things begin to evolve, from the hell realms and the earth and so forth. It's kind of like the forming of the universe. Then a period of abiding. Once things are formed and the realms are filled, it's at that point that humans begin to appear in the human realm, the eon of abiding or abidance. And, and then there's a period, an eon of destruction. And at the end of the eon of destruction, there's an eon of emptiness. Not emptiness like shunyata, but when the universe is no longer has any material form after being destroyed, and it will arise again due to the collective karma of sentient beings. So the different explanations in the higher tenets also about what happens to the matter and so forth. But anyway, so we'll talk each of these. So this is a great eon. 4 of these eons of formation, abiding, destruction, and emptiness. That constitutes a great eon. And any one of these 4 eons are comprised of what are called 20 intermediate eons. Have you heard this before? You've heard this before, right? 20 intermediate eons. So intermediate eon in general is the time it takes for the lifespan of the humans to go from 10, when it's very, very low, that's the lifespan, up to 80,000, and then come down to 10 again. That's the time. That's called an intermediate eon. I say that's in general because the first intermediate eon, at the beginning of the formation of the universe, the lifespan of the humans is 80,000. The first humans that are born in the human realm is 80. The lifespans are 80,000 years. That would be nice for Larry Ellison to know about. He can.
10 to 80,000 and back down to 10 is considered 120.
One intermediate eon. Okay, there's said to be 20 intermediate eons in one of these periods, like say the period of abiding. But the way it starts out is that it starts out up at 80,000. The lifespan of the humans is 80,000 years. The bodies are light-like, maybe like the legend of the Garden of Eden. There is the first inhabitants of the human realm at that time, born there because of their karma. Not like they're created by a creator, but from a Buddhist perspective, they're born from either another universe or from the second concentration and above, which still exists from a previous universe. At the end of a universe, when all of the different realms, the desire realm is destroyed, up to and including the first concentration, the first dhyana or jhana, right? All of that's destroyed at the end, the eon of destruction. But the second, the third, the fourth concentration, did you know that, Venerable? And the formless realms remain. And at the beginning of the next eon, it's some of those beings who take rebirth. When their karma finishes to be in the second concentration, they take rebirth in the first concentration, or as humans, or as other beings, or people from other world systems. So at first, the human lifespan is up 80,000 years, and it starts to decrease down to 10 years. Right now, we're on that first long descent. So that first descent from 80,000 to 10 is itself one intermediate eon. Although in general, the other ones, the same period of time, it goes from 10 up to 80,000 down to 10, up to 80,000 down to 10. That's an intermediate eon. Whereas the beginning, the first big descent takes one intermediate eon. And then the last great ascent, going from 10 to 80,000 years, at the end of the eon of abiding, that also is an intermediate eon. So there's 1, 2, and then there's how many in between then? There's 18 other eons where it goes from 10 to 80,000 down to 10 again. So it's said that in general the lifespan decreases 1 year every 100 years. So when 2,000 years ago, the lifespan of humans was said to be about what?
40.
No, I mean according to the scriptural. I mean even in the Bible, Abraham, Methuselah, other people lived many hundred. I mean people died younger, but the maximum lifespan was said to be about 100 years in that eon when the Buddha descended into the world 2,000 years ago. 2,000 or 2,500? Sorry, 2,500 years ago. So 2,500 years, every 100 years the lifespan is decreased by 1. So now the average lifespan must be around 75. So you do find people living much longer than that. Probably Dwight, how old are you?
73.
73. So you're going to live much longer than the average. There are people in the world. We might think that the average lifespan is increasing. It doesn't mean that people only live 75 years, or at the time of the Buddha, people only lived 100 years. They could have lived much longer, but that's the average. And what we're doing in a period like this is we're eliminating other kinds of conditions for some individuals that prevent them from living out their full lifespan. So there's this kind of explanation of these 4 periods. The period of destruction or dissolution. And let's say the Buddhas will appear in this fortunate eon. How many Buddhas will appear? 4 Buddhas have appeared so far. Said 1,000 Buddhas will appear in this. Pardon? No, not even. No. 4. I mean, the Buddha. Shakyamuni Buddha was the 4th Buddha, right, of this eon. So we're still in the Great Descent. So there was one Buddha that appeared when the lifespan. The Buddhas only appear when the lifespan is going down, never on ascending when the lifespan is getting higher. Maybe because things look kind of like some kind of inherent kind of optimism in the mind or overconfidence. Things are getting better. I don't know what the reason is, but they only appear when the lifespans are decreasing. And from the time that the lifespan was 80,000 years till the time the lifespan was 100, at the time of Shakyamuni, it said that 4 Buddhas appeared. Shakyamuni was the 4th, right?
Who made up this system?
So someone once asked about who made this system of karma, who thought this up, or who's deciding that the lion should get bad karma for eating other animals. It's not fair. I remember people saying, it's not fair. Why should they? They don't have any choice.
This regulation and everything and all this so precise and everything and...
Just kind of like, why does fire rise? I mean, there may be some situations when it doesn't rise, it goes down, but in generally fire rises. Why do apples fall? You can ask Newton, So you can try to you can try to find some kind of underlying reason, but supposedly the evolution of the universes arise because of the collective karma of sentient beings. Anyway, this is as explained in the Abhidharma, okay? So the eon of destruction has 7 kind of periods. The first one is when the rains cease and vegetation begins to wither and die. The second is when a second sun appears, because we already had one sun, right? The third is when there's a third sun, and when the second sun appears, small lakes begin to dry up. When the third sun appears, large lakes dry up, and not surprisingly. Fourth sun appears, seas dry up. Fifth sun, when the oceans dry up. Sixth sun appears, the 4 continents and Mount Meru begin to smolder, and when the 7th sun appears, everything is consumed up to and including the first concentration. So even the first concentration is destroyed at the end of like sometimes you say the fire at the end of the eon. Do you ever see that in the prayer sometime? Something blazing like the fire of the end of the eon. So that means the fire of these 7 suns. So it will remain for physicists to see whether, Leo and others, to see whether there is any kind of corresponding thing like that in physics. So those are some of the common things of the Theravada, of the Vaibhashika tenets. So let me just, for a little bit, introduce the Sautrantika, the second of the Hinayana tenets, the second of the 4 philosophical schools in our text. And what I would ask you is if you could prepare for Saturday and to read this section. Maybe we can actually, do a once over, because that will give us more time to go over the Mahayana tenets, the Chittamatra, and the 2 Madhyamaka schools, where there's a lot of meat, a lot of tofu. Sorry. So the Sautrantika, as in the text that we have, translated, Venerable Sanghikanda wrote Sutra School. The second school is explained by way of these 7 topics, right? Definition, division, etymology, mode of asserting objects, mode of asserting subjects, mode of asserting selflessness, and the presentation of grounds and paths. So these same 7 outlines. So who knows, that might be one of the questions on the final exam, right, Georgie? If you memorize that.
Too bad I wasn't paying attention.
I remember once at Manjushri Institute with Geshe Tekchok, we were studying Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, Parchin. And one of the subjects was talking about, I think, this 173 divisions of the aspects of knower of all aspects, something like that, 173 or something, I think. And I remember Thupten Pende was monk at the time, Venerable Thupten Pende. He memorized all these 173 divisions, thinking it would be on the exam, and there was not one question on that exam. But who knows? There might be one question on these. Just these 7 divisions. There might be a question. Could be. You never know.
Is there a Cliff Notes for this class?
There probably will be. It will probably be called Leo Notes later, or George Notes or something. So the second school is explained by means of these 7. So the definition of a Sautrantika is one, or I think it probably says a person who propounds Hinayana tenets and who accepts both self-cognizers and external objects. How was that different than the Vaibhashika person? Did they accept external objects? Remember the definition? Vaibhashika is a person who propounds Hinayana tenets and asserts external objects to be truly existent, but does not assert self-cognizers. Here it doesn't say, does it say here truly existent? No. Okay, let's see. Does the actual Chidunika Kelim, it doesn't say truly existent. So let's see why. Maybe when they're talking about there are some objects, for them, there's a difference. Some objects, some things are truly existent, maybe some are not. Let's see. Sautrantikas and exemplifier are mutually inclusive. In Tibetan, we say Pe Tomba. That's another name. I don't know the Sanskrit name for that. The Dodepa, or Dodepa is what we say in Tibetan, Dodepa, Sautrantikas. That's a synonym for that is Pe Tomba, those who show via examples or show examples. Exemplifier. So there are divisions of the Sautrantikas, whereas before we had 3 divisions or 18 divisions of the Vaibhashikas, either according to region, 3, or the 18 schools. Here, the famous division of those who follow scripture and those who follow reasoning. The Sautrantikas following scripture and the Sautrantikas following reasoning. So the followers of scripture are those who mainly follow the Abhidharma Kosha, which was composed by Vasubandhu, right? Vasubandhu was, remember when we talked about the Abhidharma Kosha, is it mainly a Vaibhashika text? Here it sounds like it's, if the Sautrantikas are following the Abhidharma Kosha, what's the story? Well, everyone's writing. They don't
Different interpretation.
Anyone have it? Don, what do you think? Do you remember Abhidharma Kosha? Yeah?
It's one of the lower.
It's called the Lower Abhidharma,
Right.
but it was written by written by Vasubandhu, composed by Vasubandhu. He, in his youth, he studied the Kashmiri, mainly the Kashmiri tenets, and he sort of became the preeminent expert on Vaibhashika, and he wrote this text, the Abhidharma Kosha, later, it seems, not when he was young. Supposedly, the story that I understand is that he wrote it in order to purify his criticism of the Mahayana. So that's why you might say, why is he writing Hinayana text to purify? Because remember, his brother was Mahayanist, he was Hinayanist, at first, Vasubandhu. Asanga was a Mahayanist, and he used to criticize his older brother, Asanga. Oh, you're just, you Mahayana is like a sky flower, something that rises in the sky without any. It's just like the Buddha's. Buddha never taught that. It's just ridiculous. Later, when he heard through Asanga's very skillful means, Asanga reciting certain sutras, and he realized the sublimity and the logic of it. And later he repented and wrote the Abhidharma Kosha to help to purify his negative karma. So that's one of the reasons in the monasteries it said the monks who memorize Abhidharma Kosha, one of the benefits is to help to purify negative karma of abandoning the dharma created in past lifetimes. Abhidharma Kosha especially. So he wrote it, though. It seems to be an exposition of the Vaibhashika tenets, the Abhidharma Kosha. You know what the Vaibhashika is, right? But there's a lot of statements, like at the end of the sentence, it'll say, in Tibetan, those of you who are studying Tibetan, there's sometimes the last syllable of a sentence will have a naro over it, like the syllable o. The last syllable will be doubled. Like if the word ends in a r, ra in Tibetan, then after that, like mar, then the last syllable to show that the sentence is over will say ro, doubling the r with an o over it. Whereas if you say something different, if you put at the end where it should be ro, you put lo, instead of all the time lo, lo, or la naro lo. Do you know what that means, Venerable? Tibetan, or in Sanskrit, I'm not sure how it says in Sanskrit. There's some syllable like that. It kind of implies, so they say. What would we say in modern colloquial? Like sort of like implying that that's what they say, but I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Whatever is not quite strong enough. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
What do you think? Do you have any idea? Does that ring a bell with you? Like in modern? Venerable, do you know? Anything in?
So they say.
So they say. Yeah, okay, so they say. This, I was just trying to think if there's one word or something.
In Wayne's world, he's like, that's really cool.
Not. Yeah, okay, there we go. Okay, so Wayne's World, if those of you who remember, was it Dana Carvey? Was that it?
Yeah, Michael Myers.
Mike Myers and Dana Carvey. So, yeah. Abraham Lincoln. Not. Yeah. So, Dorji is the best student in the class. Not. So it would be a little bit like that. There would be this implication, although not, but something a little bit subtle, low. So those who knew realized that his commentary was not really agreeing with the Vaibhashikas. It was saying this, it was actually exposition of the Vaibhashika from the point of view of the Sautrantikas. So then he was asked to write a commentary by the great Vaibhashika masters, because this was a fantastic exposition, short little text explaining in verse all of their teachings they could kind of understand. And when he wrote the commentary, they realized all these lows were knots, and like he explained it from the Sautrantika point of view. So the Sautrantikas following scripture are following the Abhidharma Kosha, not from the point of view of not from the point of view of following the Abhidharma, the Vaibhashika tenets, but from the commentary that Vasubandhu wrote himself about that. The followers of reasoning are those Sautrantikas who follow the 7 scriptures, 7 treatises on valid cognitions. Here, remember we talked a minute ago, there were 7 treatises on Abhidharma. This is different, obviously. The 7 treatises on valid cognition were something that came after the time of the Buddha, at the time of Dignaga and Dharmakirti. I think Dharmakirti wrote, I'm not sure, was it Dignaga or Dharmakirti wrote? Huh? Was it Dharmakirti?
According to the Chinese.
Yeah, Dharmakirti wrote the 7 treatises on valid cognition. His teacher, Dignaga, wrote a text on valid cognition, and Dharmakirti wrote many treatises about that. So it started at that period, around the time of Vasubandhu also. So it seems that Dharmakirti, Dignaga, who was predecessor, Dharmakirti, who came later, I don't think they were direct guru and disciple. They may have been separated by some time. They were practitioners of both the Chittamatra and the Sautrantaka. Actually, Vasubandhu also wrote texts on Chittamatra, but anyway, when we talk about Sautrantaka, he's mainly just talking about his Abhidharma Kosha. So, the what is it called? The Pramanavartika, the Treatise on Valid Cognition, one particular text called the Treatise on Valid Cognition, commentary to Dignaga's, one of Dignaga's texts on valid cognition, or Pramana. Dharmakirti sometimes writes from the point of view of Sautrantaka, sometimes writes from the point of view of Chittamatra. So he also was a tantric practitioner who wrote texts on Tantra, Dharmakirti, and also wrote some Mahayana commentaries to the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. So here, the so-called followers of reasoning are those who follow the 7 treatises of valid cognition. So they have slightly different tenets. We'll see as we go through the Sautrantikas. They have slightly different viewpoints about what the Sautrantika tenets are. So this is division. Etymology of the term, that means the meaning of the term. They are called Sautrantikas because they propound tenets following the sutras of the Buddha. They're also called exemplifiers, or those who show by example. Pe tomba means to show examples. Maybe that's why they're translating exemplifiers. They're called that because they like to explain all phenomena by means of examples. It sounds like Jesus, right? Or what was he more? Jesus taught by what? Parable, not by example. So, let's start this next section here. Mode of asserting objects. Here we get down to the actual, what their actual tenets are. For the Sautrantikas, the definition of an existent is that which is realized by valid cognition. Did we have a definition of existent for the Vaibhashikas?
It was synonymous with something else.
Okay, take a look, see if you can see.
A thing existent and knowable objects are mutually inclusive.
Thing, existent, and?
Knowable object are mutually inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a mode of asserting objects in the same, number 4.
Mm-hmm.
Definition of
That which is
that
a
which can perform a function.
So for them, if something is a thing, it is an existent, it can perform a function. Here for the Sautrantikas, they take a different beginning. They say the definition of an existent is that which is realized by valid cognition. So if something is not realizable by valid cognition, it's not realized by someone's valid cognition, it doesn't exist. You might say, well, there's something beyond the ken, beyond the perception of all beings. No one can perceive it. From a Buddhist perspective, from a Sautrantika perspective, you would have to say it doesn't exist if it can't be perceived by valid perception. Okay? In fact, that's a definition that it follows through the other tenets also, that which is realized by valid cognition. There are 2 divisions of existence: conventional truths and ultimate truths. Now, before, remember what was Thea, do you remember what, for Vaibhashika, ultimate truths were things like?
Something that even if it were to become damaged or made into parts,
Intellectually, say if you
intellectually,
analyzed it, you
yes.
separated or physically separated it.
The mind that perceived this was still in existence.
Was still existent, wasn't damaged by that. And the conventional truths were things that were could be the apprehension of which was canceled if you analyzed the parts of them or if you broke them physically. Whereas here we have a different definition completely. The definition of an ultimate truth is a phenomena that is able to perform a function ultimately. Before, what was it? Did ultimate truths perform functions?
No.
Could ultimate truths perform functions?
Yes.
Yes. All phenomena,
Permanent and impermanent.
permanent and impermanent, could perform functions. Even non-compounded space could perform a function, remember? Whereas here, the definition of an ultimate truth is a phenomena that is we could say ultimately able to perform a function, or able to perform a function ultimately. Ultimate truth, truly existent, thing, that's the same word bhava or ngopo we had before, which for the Vaibhashikas could be permanent or impermanent, right? Thing, product, impermanent phenomena, compounded phenomena, substance, and specifically characterized phenomena are all synonymous. She says mutually inclusive. Actually, it doesn't say, in the text, it doesn't say mutually exclusive. It says dun chik. Dun in Tibetan means meaning. Chik means one. So dun chik means they are this one meaning or the same meaning. In English, that's the word we usually, that phrase is usually what we say synonymous. So it's not so that, I mean, if something is synonymous, they're mutually inclusive, but that's not exactly what is said in the text. It says that they are synonymous. Dun chik. So what does that chik means? The first is like the cardinal, like one, right? Chik. Gao cha gigu chi ga chik. Dun chik. One meaning. Same meaning. So before ultimate truths are things that are impermanent and changing. Ultimate truths are here, those things that are able to perform a function. From the Sautrantika point of view, only impermanent phenomena are able to perform functions. Remember, that was one of their critiques of the 7 Abhidharma treatises, because in the Abhidharma treatises it seemed to imply there were some statements that there could be permanent and impermanent functioning things that could perform functions that were permanent. They said, ridiculous, you know. If something performs a function, it has to be impermanent. It has to be an ultimate truth. Things that are ultimately true are things that are ultimately able to perform a function. How does that map with the Vaibhashika? Maybe you'll have to think about it for a while. It's not exactly completely different, but it's not the same as the Vaibhashika position at all, right? Vaibhashika said all phenomena were able to perform a function. Here, the Sautrantikas say only impermanent phenomena are able to perform a function, and such phenomena are ultimate truths, because they're called ultimately true, or what do I say, truly existent, because they are able to perform a function ultimately. Only impermanent things. So the definition, and this is something we know, maybe those of you who studied Lorik before. Do you remember, Diana, a little bit? Yeah. It's coming back to you now. Okay. The definition of a conventional truth. So before, conventional truths were kind of like these things were conventional truths for the Vaibhashikas, right? Cups, they could be broken, they were just conventionals. Ultimate truths were the things that were really sacred and remained, even if you analyzed them and so forth. Here, there's a different take. Conventional truths are phenomena that are not able to perform a function ultimately. Conventional truth, falsely existent, permanent phenomena, generally characterized phenomena, are synonymous. So also that means the uncompounded are said to be conventional truths. Now that's a little bit different, right? before the uncompounded things were ultimate truths for the Vaibhashikas, right? Remember, like uncompounded space? That was an ultimate truth. Whereas for the Sautrantic, it's exactly the opposite. That's a conventional truth. So this is why you have to be careful in reading the text, because the various philosophical schools have different definitions. They have different understanding of what these terms mean. Just like when you meet someone and they're talking about, oh, the ultimate, the conventional, you have to understand well what the Buddha meant and perhaps what that person is meaning by those assertions when they talk about the ultimate and so forth. Because for the Sautrantikas, ultimate truths are things that are impermanent and able to perform a function ultimately. Conventional things are things that are just merely imputed by the mind. They have no real findable true existence. Again, or further, existence have two divisions: negative phenomena and positive phenomena. You could say affirmative phenomena. It sounds like affirmative action today. Negative phenomena and positive phenomena. So we talked a little bit about negative and positive phenomena just a couple minutes ago at the beginning of the class when we talked about space is a non-affirming negation, just the mere absence of obstructing contact. It's not a positive phenomenon. So here it says the definition of a negative phenomenon is a phenomenon realized by means of eliminating its object of negation by the mind apprehending it, or the mind here says holding it. You don't have to put that. That's just to make this tight definition for debate and so forth. So it's a phenomena that's realized by means of eliminating its object of negation, you could say. The mind that's apprehending it is negating its object of negation. A negative phenomena. Can you think of negative phenomena? And don't give George Bush as an example.
No money in my wallet.
No money in my wallet. Is that a negative phenomena? What is that negating? Presence of money in Venerable's wallet. No, that's not negating attachment. It might be affirming attachment. Yeah. The definition of an affirmative phenomena or positive phenomena is a phenomena realized by means of not eliminating its object of negation by the mind holding it. Or in other words, positive phenomena are phenomena that their mere presence, the positive presence of something before the mind, before the senses or to the mind, gives rise to the apprehension of that object. Negative phenomena are phenomena that are known by way of eliminating something. They are apprehended by, what's the word that is used here? By means of just by means of eliminating something. By this, a statement. Elimination can be a statement, not, as Venerable said, not money. Or like the famous statement, when we go in the divisions at other points, there's a famous example. The fat Devadatta who does not eat at night. Or is that fat Devadatta who does not eat during the day. So if someone is a human, Devadatta is a name of a human, he doesn't eat during the day, implication is what? Has to eat at night. But anyway, that is a negative phenomena, even though it is affirming something else in its place. There are different kinds of negating phenomena, negative phenomena. There are some things that merely negate, non-affirming negations like space or shunyata, where all you say is there is no, or like when you say there's no water in the mirage, the absence of water. You just, a moment before maybe you were apprehending there was water there, and it just says there's no water. Just perceiving that. That would be a negative, a non-affirming negation. Or the absence of obstructing contact. It doesn't say anything else in its place. Or shunyata, emptiness. The lack of true existence. It's not affirming anything else in its place. There are other kinds of negations that are in the act of negating, you actually affirm something else, like the fat Devadatta who does not eat during the day. It indicates or throws or implies, you could call it an implicative negation. I think John Donne translates it that way. Right? Implying that something else. While negating something else, it implies something else. So there's different kinds of negations, and even amongst those, there's different divisions. So there are two types of negatives, or negations, non-affirming negatives and affirming negatives. Examples of the former are non-compounded space, true cessation, and emptiness. Those are non-affirming negations. They are negative phenomena that appear to the mind by means of negating something, either explicitly or implicitly. Examples of the latter, affirming negations, are the reverse of a non-thing. What is the reverse of a non-thing? You reverse a non-thing. So this is this kind of a verbal kind of a thing. It doesn't work exactly in English. It means maybe you could say the opposite of a non-thing. So a non-thing, let's say non-dorje. If we labeled this handsome lad, the photographer here, dorje is the only dorje in the universe. So non-dorje is everything else in the universe other than dorje, right? The computer's not dorje, the camera's not dorje, Clayton's not dorje, the carpet's not dorje. All of those things constitute non-dorje. Right? Opposite of non-dorje is what? You get back to dorje again, right? So is that a negative phenomena, the opposite of non-dorje? It's a negative phenomena, right?
Non-dorje.
The opposite of non-dorje.
Yeah.
Non-thing.
Because something has been negated. It is something which is realized by means of negating something, right? Of eliminating something. It's eliminating what? Non-dorje.
Eliminating a non-existent thing.
No, not a non-existent thing. Eliminating something, right? So that's a negative phenomena. So this is an example of an affirming negation, because in the end something is affirmed. That's why some of you wanted to say it was a positive phenomena, because you're thinking the dorje is a positive phenomenon. Actually, I don't want to say he's a negative phenomenon.
Just a phenomenon.
It's just, no. That would be too judgmental. Okay, there are two types of negatives, non-affirming negations and affirming negations. Examples of the former are non-compounded space, true cessation, and emptiness. Examples of the latter are the reverse of a non-thing, the opposite of a non-thing. So thing means, like in this case, we could say dorje. And the appearance of the reverse of a non-pot to the conception apprehending it. So those of you who've studied low rig will know very well what that is, right? So when we talk about the mental image, the way that a mental image arises in our minds, if you have a mental image of mama, in Italy that's very, la mama. I remember once during Christmas time, there was a Christmas course at Instituto Lama Tsongkhapa, and Lama Yeshe was giving the course, and dear Piero Cherry he wanted to go, had to go home, because in Italy you had to spend the holidays with your mama. I mean, we do here also, right? We feel that's very important. And I remember Lama being very wrathful with him and saying, Guru is more important than mama, something like that. I wonder if Piero will ever watch this tape. Probably not. So mental image, the way the mental image is, let's say the mental image of a pot is said to arise according to these tenets, is via this kind of procedure of negation. The mental image, or what we call meaning generality, it's the generality that the mind conceives of as pots in general. That arises from the mechanism of taking the reverse or the opposite of a non-pot. Non-pot meaning everything else in the universe which is non-pot, which is not pot itself, and then the reverse or opposite of that comes back to pot. So it actually implies something. It is an affirming negation, but it's still a negative phenomena. And that's the appearing object of conception. So why don't we leave it here? So little start. And we'll continue on the next class, which in our case will be Saturday. We'll do 2 classes on Saturday.
What time do we decide on Friday?
So about, maybe better to be here at 10. If I say 10:15, you'll be here at 10. Someone, not you, but someone will be here at 10:30. So let's say 10. We'll probably start about 10:15. And then we'll take a break for lunch. And then we'll do another session after lunch. This class. And the other class we'll see what people want to do. Okay. So let's spend a moment dedicating the merit, and just to remember, after this we're going to do a Medicine Buddha puja for the Maitreya project. So thinking, as the Bodhisattvas do, that we have, at the end of any action, that we have created virtuous karma, and to recognize that that should be dedicated or sealed in such a way that it is not exhausted until the final goal, ultimate goal of enlightenment. So one of the classic ways, there are many, many ways of dedicating, hundreds of millions of ways of dedication prayers. One of the ways of dedicating is, due to this merit, may I quickly achieve enlightenment, let's say the state of a Guru Buddha, which would imply some connection with Tantra also. May I quickly attain enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, in order to lead them to that very same state. So the dedication is such that, knowing that the karmic seeds that we've laid in our mind, the merit that we've created, is definite, can only ripen within cyclic existence as something that's pleasurable, or as a higher rebirth, or something which is conducive to the path, as positive phenomena. Karma is definite. Recognizing that it could ripen in such a way that it might actually be a hindrance to our practice, in causing us to be proud in the future, or have wealth that we develop attachment to, and so forth. Praying in this way, dedicating in this way, in whatever way it ripens, we will be predisposed to use that for our own spiritual development. So thinking, no matter how it ripens in cyclic existence as karma, may it not simply be utilized once, and even perhaps be used as an agent of my delusion, my pride, or my avarice, my miserliness, or my immorality, or whatever. But may it actually always become a cause of my continuing the spiritual path up to and including enlightenment, so that I can, from that state, lead all sentient beings into that everlasting blissful state.